Remember that within a module, when you're looking at a set of questions, so for example, these transition word questions, which will usually appear in the 22 to 24, 25 region of the test, the questions within that chunk, within that group of transition questions, typically get harder as you work through them. So the first transition question you see in a module will usually be easier than the last one. Now, one of the things that they can do to make the harder questions harder is by having choices that are a little unusual, transition words that are not as common. In addition, nevertheless, consequently, we see those quite a bit. Where something like indeed, you're not really going to see outside of formal writing or academic writing. So you're not as familiar with it compared to some of these other words. Now, it's not to say that those unfamiliar choices are always right, but definitely give them a look, because a lot of times those weird transition words, especially on your harder questions, will be correct. And so at the worst, they are good guesses. But of course, if we know what they mean and we know how they're used, that helps as well. So let's take a look at this. Seismologists have proposed that the magma fueling Iceland's more than 30 active volcano systems emerges from deep within Earth. The great depths involved, nearly 3,000 kilometers, mark Iceland's volcanoes as extreme outliers. Many of Earth's volcanoes are fed by shallow pockets of magma found less than 15 kilometers below the surface. So we have a little bit of a vocab here as well, like outliers. So something that's an outlier is something that's way outside of the norm. It's an anomaly. It's a very powerful exception to a general trend or a general idea. And so what they're saying here is that the great depths of these volcanoes are extreme outliers. In other words, they're very different from the typical ways volcanoes are set up on Earth. And the next sentence confirms or explains or elaborates on that, right? To say that, look, many of Earth's volcanoes are fed by shallow pockets, as opposed to these volcanoes which are fed by great deep pockets of magma and those outliers. So we want a transition word here that emphasizes or builds on or confirms what was stated in the previous sentence. So when we look at our choices here, in addition, it's not strong enough. If you use something like in addition, you're showing sort of another example of something or another reason for something. It's a related point, but it's separate. And here we're directly building off of the previous point. Now, consequently, which shows a cause and effect, a little bit too strong here. We're not showing a cause and effect relationship here, like because these are outliers, therefore here's what happens on Earth typically. That's not really the relationship here. And we don't want contrast. While there is some contrast in these points, the fact that we're talking about these volcanoes as extreme outliers already kind of shows us the contrast. We don't need to apply that contrast here. And so this unusual word, indeed, which is the only choice that really is left here, ends up being the winner. Now, indeed is actually, of all the unusual transition words that appear on the test, I think it's one of the more common ones. So it is good to know this one. So indeed is used exactly like we want it to be used here. It's to emphasize, confirm, or strongly build on, or strongly restate something that was said in the very previous sentence often, right? So here we're emphasizing, we're confirming that, yeah, these great depths are outliers, because typically many of Earth's volcanoes are fed by shallow pockets of magma. So we're building on and confirming that idea, and that's where indeed would work. So it turns out in this case, yeah, this kind of strange choice does win. Again, don't always pick it when you see a choice with strange transition words. They're not always right, but definitely don't eliminate it, especially if you don't know what it means. And keep it as an option if you're going to have to make a guess. If you know, look, let's just say choice A here works perfectly, then fine. You're not going to pick the hard word. But if you're stuck between a choice like, let's say, A or B, and a choice like C, and you're really not sure which one to go with, I would lean more towards the unknown word, just because, especially on the harder questions, that tends to be where the answer is hiding. And in this case, yes, the answer is C.